Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. We're diving deep today into conflict management. You guys gave us some selections from Designing Conflict Management Systems, a book by Kathy A. Costantino and Christina Sickles-Merchant. And it looks fascinating. It's all about building systems that don't just patch up disagreements when they happen, but actually use them to the organization's advantage.
Yeah. Most companies see conflict like that leaky faucet.
Yeah.
Just, fix it when it trips. This book argues that's a mistake. We need to be thinking bigger, like designing the whole plumbing system that can actually anticipate and manage that conflict constructively.
I love that analogy. That's really cool. So the book starts with something I think we all kind of know intuitively. Conflict is inevitable. But I bet you there are things about conflict that we don't know.
Oh, absolutely. The authors highlight a common blind spot. Organizations rarely see conflict as its own system, so they're reacting to it. They're not planning for it. And because of that, they outline 4 typical responses that we see: authority reactive, rights-based, interest-based, and stakeholder-derived.
4 responses. I'm picturing like a conflict over project deadlines. An authority reactive manager would just dictate the solution. Right, like a king making decrees.
Exactly, you got it. A rights-based approach would stick to the rule book no matter what. Interest-based would focus on collaboration, finding solutions that work for everyone. And stakeholder-derived. That means everyone involved gets a say in designing the system itself.
So it's like choose your conflict resolution adventure. I've definitely worked with some kings in my time, but that interest-based approach definitely sounds more effective in the long run. What do you think?
Each has its place depending on the organization, the situation. But what I think is so exciting is that the book introduces us to this powerful set of tools called ADR, or Appropriate Dispute Resolution. Have you heard of ADR before?
It rings a bell, but refresh my memory. It's about finding alternatives to go into court, right?
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Studies show that ADR can resolve these disputes 50% faster than traditional litigation. Saves time. Saves money. Imagine a legal battle that could drag on for months, costing your organization thousands. ADR could resolve that same dispute in weeks.
Wow, that is a significant difference. So what are some examples of ADR in action?
The book highlights several. You've got negotiation, where the parties directly hash out a solution; mediation, where a neutral third party helps guide the conversation; arbitration, where an expert makes a binding decision. They even talk about preventative ADR, like training employees on communication skills.
Preventative ADR, so equipping people to handle conflict before it even escalates. It's like preventative healthcare for the organization.
Exactly. Building a culture of conflict management instead of just reacting when things boil over.
This is all great, but it makes me wonder, how do we actually design a system that works for a specific organization? Is it like a one-size-fits-all solution, or?
Definitely not. The book really stresses that these cookie-cutter approaches just won't cut it. You need to understand the organization's mission, their culture, and the types of conflict they face.
So it's about tailoring the system to the organization, like a bespoke suit. So what's the first step in that tailoring process?
The authors recommend assembling a design team. Stakeholders from different parts of the organization who come together to create that system. Think of it like this. Mention a company similar to the listeners grappling with challenges similar to yours. The book illustrates how they tackled these issues by forming this diverse design team that brought all these different perspectives to the table and crafted a system tailored to their unique needs.
That's fascinating. It sounds like having that diverse design team is crucial to success. But what happens next? How do we actually put those ideas into action?
Well, the book goes deep on implementation, emphasizing that it's this multifaceted process involving meticulous planning, stakeholder engagement, and consistent communication.
So it's not as simple as just flipping a switch and suddenly everyone's a conflict resolution guru.
Not quite. It's more like a carefully choreographed dance. The authors suggest starting with a pilot program.
Okay, so like a test run before launching it company-wide.
Exactly. You pick a specific area where conflict is a recurring issue, and you apply those ADR and conflict management principles that we talked about. This way, you can work out any kinks before rolling it out to the entire organization. It's like dipping your toes in the water before diving head first.
Makes sense. We don't want to make a big splash without testing the temperature first. But how do we choose the right people for this pilot program?
It's crucial to involve stakeholders who will be directly affected by the changes, get their input from the beginning, address their concerns, and ensure that the solutions actually work for them.
Right, because what works for the accounting department might not work for the marketing team. Seems like collaboration is a recurring theme here.
Absolutely. And remember, this pilot program should be tied to organizational goals. It's not about resolving conflict for conflict's sake. It's about achieving those strategic objectives.
So how do we make sure this conflict management system isn't just a temporary fix, but becomes a lasting part of the company culture?
That's where leadership comes in. The book emphasizes that successful implementation needs buy-in and support from the top down. Leaders need to walk the talk.
So it's not enough for the CEO to just give a speech about conflict resolution. They need to actively champion the system, show their team how to use it effectively.
Precisely. Leaders at all levels need to embrace the process and encourage their teams to do the same. It's about fostering a culture where conflict is seen as an opportunity for growth and innovation, not something to be feared or avoided.
I love that. But I imagine that even with the best leadership, there will still be some resistance to change. People are creatures of habit, after all.
You're right, resistance is a natural part of any change process, and the book provides this great framework for understanding and overcoming it.
Well, I'm all ears. Give me the tools to break down those walls of resistance.
The authors categorize the sources of resistance into three main buckets: fear, lack of trust, and incongruent symbols and images.
Okay, let's unpack those. What are some common fears that people have about conflict management systems?
Well, people might fear losing control or facing retaliation for speaking up. They might also worry about appearing weak if they don't fight for their side, or feel intimidated by the new system itself if they're not familiar with ADR.
So it makes sense that people would be hesitant to embrace a system that feels unfamiliar or potentially threatens their sense of security. So how do we build trust and make the system feel less intimidating?
Communication is key. Clearly explain the why behind the change. Address people's concerns honestly and openly. Be transparent about the process and create opportunities for them to share their thoughts and ask questions.
So no more sweeping conflict under the rug. We need to bring it out in the open and have those honest conversations.
Exactly. And don't forget about involvement. People are more likely to support a system they helped create. So include those who are resistant in the design and implementation process.
That's a great point. It gives people a sense of ownership and control. But what about situations where that resistance stems from deeper systemic issues within the organization?
You're hitting on another crucial aspect. Sometimes the resistance isn't about the conflict management system itself, but about these underlying problems like a culture of fear or a lack of transparency.
So if the company has a history of broken promises or unfair treatment, it's going to be hard for people to trust that this new system will be any different.
Exactly. If those issues aren't addressed, any attempt to implement a new system will likely face resistance. It's not just about changing how we handle conflict, it's about changing the organizational culture as a whole.
Okay, so we need to be aware of those deeper issues and address them proactively. But how do we actually put those ideas into practice? What are some specific tactics we can use to overcome resistance?
Well, the book offers a variety of approaches, including providing training and education about the new system, facilitating dialogue and problem-solving sessions, and creating safe spaces for people to voice their concerns and ideas.
It sounds like it's all about meeting people where they are, listening to their concerns, and helping them understand the benefits of the new system.
Exactly. It's about creating that supportive environment where people feel comfortable expressing themselves and asking questions.
This is all so insightful. But I can't help but wonder, how do we measure the success of this new conflict management system? How do we know if our efforts are actually making a difference?
That's where evaluation comes in. And the book stresses that it shouldn't be an afterthought. We need to incorporate those different types of evaluation: effectiveness, satisfaction, and efficiency right from the start.
Right. Effectiveness means we're hitting those goals. Satisfaction ensures people are happy with the process. And efficiency means we're not wasting time and resources.
You got it. It's about constantly gathering data, analyzing results, and making adjustments along the way. Think of it like checking the map regularly to make sure you're still on course.
So how do we actually measure these things? Are we talking surveys, interviews, or maybe some kind of conflict resolution scoreboard?
It can be a mix of all those things. The key is to establish clear metrics for success early on. For example, you might track the number of conflicts resolved through ADR, the average time it takes to resolve a dispute, or the satisfaction levels of those involved.
So we're quantifying those warm and fuzzy feelings of conflict resolution. But what happens if those numbers aren't where we want them to be?
That's when that evaluation data becomes incredibly valuable. It helps us pinpoint those areas that need improvement. Maybe there's a specific type of conflict that keeps cropping up, or a particular department that's resistant to using ADR.
And we can use that data to tweak the system and make it even better.
Precisely. Evaluation is all about continuous improvement. We learn from our experiences and make that conflict management system as effective and user-friendly as possible.
This all makes so much sense. But we've been focusing on the nuts and bolts of implementation. Let's zoom out a bit. What does the long-term vision for a successful conflict management system look like?
The book paints a picture of a workplace where conflict isn't this dreaded monster, but a valuable resource. It's a place where people are equipped to handle disagreements constructively, where open dialogue replaces fear, and where differences are seen as opportunities for growth and innovation.
That sounds like a workplace I want to be a part of.
It is, and that brings us back to that concept of leadership. Building that kind of culture requires leaders who champion the process, model the behaviors they want to see, and empower their teams to embrace conflict as a catalyst for positive change.
It sounds like we're talking about a real cultural shift, not just adding a new HR policy.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, how do we make sure this conflict management system doesn't become just another flavor of the month? How do we sustain that momentum?
Yeah, you've hit on a critical point. The book emphasizes the importance of weaving conflict management into the very fabric of the organization. It's about creating a culture where these principles are not just understood, but actually lived.
So it becomes part of the DNA of the company, not just a Band-Aid solution.
Exactly. One way to achieve this is by establishing a dedicated ADR design team, a group responsible for overseeing the system's implementation and ongoing development.
So they're like the guardians of the conflict management galaxy, making sure everything runs smoothly. What does their work actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
They monitor the system, gather feedback from stakeholders, analyze data from those evaluations we discussed, and make necessary adjustments along the way. They're constantly looking for ways to refine and improve the process.
So it's like this ongoing process of evolution and adaptation.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, do we need like a formal written ADR policy as part of this cultural shift?
That's a great question. While we don't want to get bogged down in rigid rules, the book does suggest having a written ADR policy. It doesn't have to be overly formal, but it provides a clear framework for how ADR will be used within the organization.
So it's like setting ground rules for how we're going to play the game of conflict resolution, ensuring that consistency and transparency across the board.
Exactly. And this policy should be developed collaboratively with stakeholders, incorporating their input and reflecting the organization's values.
There's that collaborative spirit again. But even with a clear policy and a dedicated team, how do we incentivize people to actually use the system? Isn't it human nature to sometimes just avoid conflict altogether?
You're right. But the book argues that we can encourage people to embrace this new way of doing things by recognizing and rewarding those behaviors that contribute to a positive conflict management culture.
So instead of giving bonuses for avoiding arguments, we acknowledge and celebrate those who demonstrate strong communication skills or effectively resolve disagreements.
Precisely. It's about shifting that mindset from conflict avoidance to conflict resolution as a valuable skill. And you can also make it easier for people to utilize ADR by streamlining those processes, providing training on negotiation and mediation techniques, and generally removing any barriers to engagement.
So it sounds like we're creating this system that supports and rewards healthy conflict resolution at every level. This has been such a fascinating deep dive. I'm already feeling more confident in my ability to navigate those choppy waters of conflict.
Me too. And remember, this journey doesn't end when this deep dive is over. There will be challenges along the way. But by applying these principles, you can transform conflict from this dreaded obstacle into a catalyst for growth, innovation, and stronger relationships.
So instead of seeing conflict as a threat, we can view it as an opportunity to learn
Grow.
and build something better.
Exactly. It's a powerful shift in perspective. And remember, this doesn't just apply to the workplace. Think about your personal relationships, your community involvement. These principles can be applied anywhere conflict arises.
Wow, that's a lot to consider. To all our listeners out there, we hope you're leaving this episode feeling empowered to tackle those tough conversations and build a more harmonious world, one conflict at a time. Until next time, keep diving deep. See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.